We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Yo guys! I'm Yuruzi. Here's part 6 of What If Naruto Studied Fuinjutsu. While exploring the Team 7 training ground, a young Naruto happens to stumble across a strangely shaped kunai embedded in a tree. Years of frustration and deciphering later, he finally cracks the Fuinjutsu formula hidden along the handle to surprising and painful results. At the same time, a ghost of the Otsutsuki sets in motion a plan to end his family's eternal conflict. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 23, Hell Frozen Over. The ice dragons let out a roar and they surged forward like tentacles. With their superior eyes, Hinata and Sasuke both dodged out of the way of their respective tendrils, and Naruto simply gave his own icy stare right back into the Jutsu's eyes. Just before it slammed into him, he flipped back, jumping over the incoming attack. It crashed into the river, spraying water in every direction. Naruto wasted little time as he landed on its neck and began racing back towards the enemy Nin. The masked boy didn't even move as the remaining dragons roared and raced towards him. Naruto ducked under the first one and leapt onto the second before continuing his path towards Haku. With a glance over his shoulder, Naruto leapt off, pausing only to quickly turn around and toss explosive notes at the heads that had turned around to chase him. Haku paid the ensuing explosions little mind as he stared down. The blonde blur appeared before him with his fist cocked back. Naruto slammed his fist forward, only to be met by a wall of water that suddenly rose from the river. Naruto grunted and kicked off the shield, which was instantly barraged by phoenix flower bullets. Sasuke kept up the pressure as he forced him to keep up the shield. The masked boy raised his hands to steady his shield as it was bombarded by fire, when suddenly, two blurs appeared on both sides of him. Hinata and Naruto unleashed a barrage of shuriken on the masked Nin, who seemed to pay them no mind, until he cancelled the jutsu and simply dropped under the surface of the water. The shuriken clanged into each other, as Sasuke stopped his jutsu. They didn't have to wait for long, as a new water dragon, larger than any of the previous ones, burst from the surface. Haku floated safely within the head of the jutsu, and it let out a deafening roar as it glared down at the two genin beneath it. It hissed at them before it was rocketed by another explosion. It let out a roar of pain as Sasuke blasted it with several fireball jutsu. It recoiled under the heat and turned its head towards its attacker. It let out another roar, and began racing towards him. Sasuke cancelled his jutsu and began weaving new signs as he backpedaled away from the aquatic monolith chasing after him. He finished the final hand sign and pointed his finger at the approaching construction. An arrow of electricity crackled along his fingertip and it shot off towards the dragon. Before the bolt impacted, the dragon construct fell apart, reducing the possibility of impact. The jutsu flew harmlessly over the shoulder of the hunter Nin as he sailed towards Sasuke. Even with the Sharingan, he was too slow as the hunter Nin kneed him in the face. Haku landed on his hands and knees and twisted up for a kick towards the boy. His red eyes flashed and this time he caught it. He grinned over Haku's shoulder as someone approached from behind. The Kiri Nin bent forward as Hinata's palm sailed over him. He quickly stabbed two Senbon into Sasuke's hands, causing him to release his foot. He twisted to retaliate, but was surprised when Naruto appeared in front of him and punched him in the face. His mask cracked as he flew back, bouncing once on the water, before responding with a water bullet. The other two jumped away as Naruto pulled out a scroll. He whipped it open and the bullet slammed to a halt as the seals did their work. The markings on the page flashed white, and the blob of water disappeared. He smirked as he reared back and sent the bullet right back at him. He let out a cocky grin as bullet slammed into the masked boy, though his victory was short-lived as a smaller water dragon burst from the water and slammed him in the gut. His eyes widened as the air was knocked from his lungs, and he was flung back across the river. Hinata wasted little time and raced after the masked boy. She was upon him in seconds and they begun an intricate dance, as the boy desperately tried to avoid being touched by those troublesome hands. Just one touch was all she needed. He could calm down any muscle she agitated through acupuncture if he needed to, but he could not reopen Tenketsu. Sasuke joined her shortly afterwards and their dance intensified, as he traded blows with the Uchiha, all while trying to avoid the strikes from the Hyuga. Frustrated from not landing her hits, Hinata stopped and began racing through hand signs. Sasuke recognized the jutsu with his Sharingan and grabbed hold of the Hunter Nin's arms. He spun him around and tossed him into the air as a stream of water crashed into him. The water slammed into the boy and it continued to bombard him throughout his descent. His eyes widened through his mask as he saw the Uchiha boy next the girl with his hand sparking from the jutsu he had seen a week earlier. As he reached his hand out to electrify the current, Haku pushed against the stream forcing it to freeze over instantly. The effect raced along the stream towards Hinata, as spikes jutted from the frozen water. She cut off the jutsu, just as the process neared her face. The long beam of ice splashed into the water, as Haku landed on his feet. A shadow appeared overhead, and he jumped away as a tower of shadow clones, stacked up on each other, crashed into the water. As they popped away, 5 clones burst through the smoke and engaged him. Though they were fast, he easily popped them with a simple jab of his Senbon. After dealing with the last one, he was surprised when a 6th one rose from below him and jumped on his back. Gotcha! He smirked as 4 more clones burst from the water and grabbed hold of his arms and legs. He struggled under the weight of the blondes and an icicle spear began forming in his right hand. He stabbed through the 2 on his right, but that was as far as he got as pain burned across his back. Sasuke slammed a kunai in his shoulder from behind, and clutched the boy's arm to his chest. Haku struggled against the boys and his eyes widened as he noticed Hinata jumping over them and crouching into a strange stance. "You are within range of my divination," she uttered coldly. Haku actually panicked as the girl raced towards him and jabbed 2 strikes into his arm and chest. The muscles in the areas immediately contracted, and he cringed at the burning sensation. 2 palms. Hinata shouted, as she twisted to begin the next set. Haku's eyes flashed. He could not fail Zabuza-sama like this. Anger surged through him as he stomped his free foot on the water. For P. Hinata started to shout as there was a bright flash, and she realized she couldn't move. She couldn't speak. She could only gasp, as the entire group was encased in a block of ice. Kakashi felt like a sitting duck, as he stood completely rigid within the blanket of mist. Even the slightest movement would allow Zabuza to hone in on his position. Without Hinata helping him, locating the man had become virtuously impossible. He was like a ghost who could disappear into the fog without a sound. Zabuza was now actually managing to sneak up on him. He resisted the urge to look down at the new cuts and slashes that had grazed his body. The man was growing more and more aggressive as time went by. Zabuza knew he was running low on reserves, and he did not want to stretch this battle any longer than he had to. Even if he dealt with himself and the kids, the man would still have to figure out how to get past Naruto's barrier seal. While he felt a little uncomfortable from the feeling of exposure, Kakashi was fine with Zabuza's behavior. It just meant there were more opportunities for him to mess up. His plan was set. All he needed to do now was whittle down Zabuza just a little more, and wait for the opportune time to strike, just after they disengaged. The more chakra Zabuza exhausted, the slower he would be. This worked in his favor, as the mist was constantly drawing on the Zabuza's reserves. He could have sworn he saw something move to his right side and his eyes narrowed. That being said, sitting here waiting for Zabuza to strike wasn't exactly ideal either. They could only stare in horror as they were frozen in place. Haku stared down at the girl's outstretched palm, only an inch from his heart. The only thing that could move was their eyes. Their eyes seemed to plead to each other as they desperately tried to free themselves from their frozen prison. Naruto let out a silent scream as he fought against his restraints. Sasuke closed his eyes as he started taking deep breaths, feeling his chakra heat up in chest. It was going to be extremely difficult without hand signs, but he had practiced this jutsu for years. Bubbles began forming around the masked Nin, and they were shocked as he started moving in the ice as if it was just water. He detached the boys from his body, and stepped away from Hinata's attack. The boy's chest seemed to heave as he crossed his arms, and they all felt a swell of chakra. He slammed his arms out and the ice began to shake. Cracks formed across the iceberg, splitting it into 3 halves, and the genin were sent flying away from him. Hinata's block of ice was sent flying and crashed against a pillar of the bridge, shattering upon impact. She continued her momentum and the back of her head slammed against the concrete pillar. Everything went dark as she fell into the water. Naruto was sent sailing back towards the riverbed near the completed section of the bridge, while Sasuke was sent towards the unfinished side. Haku knelt on the water and panted. He narrowed his eyes as he stared at the Hyuga's crumpled form floating in the water. She was out, at least for a little while. He glanced at the block of ice containing the blonde, and thankful to see him still struggling against his confines. Finally, he turned his head towards the last block as a plume of fire burst through the ice. Freezing water dripped down his forehead, but he didn't care. Sasuke took in deep breaths as air finally returned to his lungs. He released 2 more breaths of fire as he freed his arms and legs. Ignoring the blistering pain from the cold, he jumped out of the iceberg and landed on the water. He panted as he stared, planning. He needed to get to his teammates and help them get out. He eyed Naruto's block further away from him, but was worried when he couldn't find Hinata. He froze when he saw the chunks of ice near the bridge and her floating body in the water. "Hinata!" he shouted. His heart sank when she remained unresponsive. He was shocked for a second before he started racing forward. "You shall not be going anywhere," a cold voice responded as a form rose up from the water in front of him. It was only thanks to his Sharingan that he was able to prevent the blow from piercing his heart. Instead, he managed to lean out of the way just enough for it to pierce his shoulder instead. He cried out from the pain, and tried to kick the boy away. The boy jumped back, and began racing through one-handed seals with his good hand. Sasuke felt his heart sank as the water rose above him and formed a cage. The water morphed, and once again he found himself back inside the accursed dome of mirrors. "You shall not be escaping this again," the boy said as he raced through hand signs. "Suetun, ruthless entrapment." Sasuke cried out as 2 spikes of water pierced through his thighs and continued to race up his legs. He was brought to his knees as he wailed at the pain. The spikes of water continued to hold him down as Haku raced through more seals. Suetun, executioner's bondage. Tendrils of water shot up like whips and wrapped around his arms and neck, effectively tying him down. He clenched his teeth through the pain as he glared at the masked boy. "You were foolish for chasing me down here. You should have known better than to challenge a Suetun user on a body of water." The boy was silent as his copies in every mirror palmed their Senbon. "Now, you shall pay for your ignorance." Naruto thrashed against the ice. He needed to get out. He needed to help them. Though it was slightly blurry, he could slightly see out of the iceberg. He could see the outline of Sasuke's iceberg across from him, but he couldn't see Hinata's. He stared at the bridge and could see something floating in the water amongst the blocks of ice, and his thrashing became more violent. He only paused when a plume of fire rose up across the river. He had a hard time, but he could just make out Sasuke's form emerging from the ice. Good. He was free. He had to help her. His heartbeat quickened as he saw another form rise up near him, and did something to Sasuke. He couldn't hear him, but he could tell Sasuke was writhing in pain. His heart sank as he saw the familiar dome of mirrors reform around them. No. Memories raced through his mind as he thrashed even harder against his constraints. He remembered Sasuke acknowledging him the first time he had actually landed a punch. Both of them offering their food to Hinata. Their fight against the Iwa Nin. Their spars against Kakashi-sensei. Being chased by his deranged dogs. Working together to fight against Zabuza and free Kakashi. His silent moment with Hinata outside the night before. His mind raced through all of these memories, before it settled on the memory of the 3 of them drifting off to sleep safely in each other's presence. He could remember what it felt like to feel so secure from their warmth of their bodies pressed against his. No! 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 Within the recess of a dark sewer stood an enormous gate with thick iron bars. The room took on a crimson hue as streaks of red chakra started escaping through the spaces between the bars. The pitch-black room was illuminated by a set of white teeth that grinned through the darkness. There was a loud shifting sound, and the water on the floor crashed against the walls as a dark shadow repositioned itself. Finally, Kakashi and Zabuza paused their game of cat and mouse, as an ominous sensation washed over them. Zabuza, the demon of the mist, actually felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up as the waves of malevolent chakra flowed through him. What the hell is this killing intent? His mind raced as he unconsciously took a step back. Kakashi felt it too, but underneath all of the anger and despair, he could still sense the familiar presence of Naruto. He whispered. Shit, basically summed up his thoughts as the possibilities of the seal weakening raced through his head. If things were resorting to that, he didn't want to know how bad it was going down there. He narrowed his eyes as he stared off into the mist. He had heard Zabuza's footstep, and it was time to stop playing around. Zabuza had been worn down enough, and would be too slow to stop what was coming. As he was distracted, Kakashi began racing through seals. Near the base of the bridge, Hinata bobbed up and down with the current of the river as her blood stained the water. Unknown to her, her chakra slightly flared and a darker, turquoise-colored chakra started rising from her chest. It twisted through the air and began heading towards the back of her skull. As it touched her skin, it changed to a lighter green color as her skull and skin began knitting themselves back together. As this was happening, there was a flash of light and a malevolent chakra washed over the area, causing the tendril to pause. Inside the girl's pouch, a scroll began to glow bright gold in response to the foreign chakra. Even more characters sprawled across the page as the kanji for 3 appeared on the front. The turquoise chakra continued to work on the girl, as a presence seemed to stare off at the block of ice that was starting to glow red. There was a flash and the ice exploded, revealing the huffing figure of a blonde boy bathed in red chakra. His eyes were slits and the whisker marks on his face were more deeply defined. He let out a roar as he stared at the dome of mirrors across the river. His eyes narrowed at the sight of the masked boy, and he dashed at an alarming rate towards them. The presence recognized the chakra, but ignored it as it continued to work. A horned figure seemed to appear as it knelt beside the girl. "I am sorry, little one. This will sadly push back our meeting. I will have to build my strength once again before we can speak face to face, but we don't have a choice. There is too much at stake to risk losing you now." The tendril of chakra finished its work and began to retreat back into her body. Her eyes seemed glazed over as she tried to open them. "Until the day we meet again, Hinata-sama," the horned figure whispered as it disappeared. Haku stopped his assault on the Uchiha as the vile chakra washed over him. He was alert and shocked by the ominous feeling emanating from the ice across the river. The water spiked through his legs disappeared, and Sasuke collapsed on the water's surface. It was all he could do to stay conscious, as he tried to look across at whatever the hell had caused that ridiculous killing intent. He heard a loud crack, and the masked Nin soared over his head. His eyes were growing blurry as he tried to get back up, but the holes in his legs and Senbon in his back were just unbearable. A red shadow raced by overhead and he heard more explosions, as the water was kicked up over and over. His eyes started to droop as consciousness started to evade him. The last that went through his head before he passed out was the image burned into his mind. His Sharingan had been active, and he had seen it all. His teammate had looked more furious than he had ever seen him before. His eyes were bloodshot and his teeth were razor sharp, like he was being controlled by the devil himself. Haku raced away from the now rabid boy, who apparently had made it his sole mission to tear him apart. He had summoned several Mizu clones to surround the boy, but the boy had slammed his clawed hands through their stomachs and ripped them to shreds. His teammate hadn't been kidding when he claimed he was fast. Water dragon after water dragon raced towards the boy, and he broke them all apart with pure force alone. He disappeared in a blur, and Haku acted as fast as possible as he raised a water wall between them. He slammed into the wall, which sent shockwaves across the water. Haku raced through one-handed seals to create a dome of water surrounding him as the boy hammered the walls again and again. He was shocked as the boy finally broke through the barrier and his hand raced towards his face. Haku instantly froze the sphere and descended into the river as cracks started to form. The sphere of ice exploded and the boy let out another blood-curdling roar as he searched for the masked boy. His eyes darted across the water until his eyes set in the direction of the bridge. Haku gasped as the boy raced towards him and smashed through one of the support pillars. How did he sense me? They jumped from one to another as the blonde smashed through everything in his way. What is he? Up above, Kakashi and Zabuza felt the force of the impacts as the bridge began to shake. This is not good, Kakashi thought as he finished his final seal. He's going to bring down the bridge if he keeps this up. His hands sparked to life as he aimed off into the mist. Here's your field test, Naruto. Zabuza turned his head as he heard the crackling of electricity followed by Raitun, lightning Fuinjutsu. Zabuza was startled as a dog coated in lightning began racing towards him. He was too tired, and it was gaining on him too fast, but it had one problem: Kakashi needed to see where the jutsu was going to control it. Zabuza retreated deeper into the mist, and jumped over the technique at the last second. He smirked as it raced under him, but that smirk turned to screams of agony as it turned around and slammed into his sword. Through the pain, he was still able to think, what the hell was that? How could Kakashi's jutsu have tracked me? There was no way he could. And then it hit him. He remembered earlier when the two stupid brats were trapped in the demonic mirrors technique and began scorching it with flames. As Kakashi had been distracted, Zabuza had rushed in desperately to try and take him by surprise. Kakashi had dodged it by jumping up and landing on his sword with his hands. He must have planted something earlier to draw the jutsu to his blade. He winced as he opened his eyes, but he felt his heart stop when he did. Staring back at him from the mist was a glowing red eye racing towards him. He didn't even have a second to react as his left side erupted with the worst pain he had ever endured. Blood splattered everywhere as Kakashi's Raikiri cleanly cut his arm off. He roared from the pain, as he desperately clutched at his bleeding stump. Kakashi snatched the Kubikurabocho out of mid-air from the dead arm, and spun it around before stabbing it straight through its true master's chest. Zabuza screamed as Kakashi shoved him back, step by step, and impaled him into the wall of the bridge. Kakashi took a step back as he took a minute to catch his breath. This battle was over. The splitting scream could be heard all across the bridge. It sent shivers down to Zuna's spine, and, down below, Haku's voice caught in his throat as he heard his master's screams of agony. Naruto was racing towards him on all fours, but he formed six-hand seals and a colossal wave began surge through the water. Naruto didn't look intimidated as it continued to rise and race towards him. He plowed straight into it, as it crashed down on top of him. He struggled as much as he could, but eventually the water won out and he was dragged downriver. Haku raced up the side of the bridge, and dove over as quickly as he could. His heart froze at the horrid sight before him. He shot off 2 water bullets at Kakashi, who easily dodged them and simply stared pitifully at the boy as he landed in front of his master. "Hajihk, Zabuza sputtered. You shall not lay another hand on him," the masked boy yelled as he stood defensively in front of him. "It is finished," Kakashi said with a calm voice, "he is not recovering from that. Be quiet." Haku roared in response. Another roar caught their attention as 2 arms of red chakra soared over the edge of the bridge. Kakashi jumped out of the way as they slammed into Haku. He gasped as the malevolent chakra started burning into his skin. The hands slammed him down repeatedly, before dragging him through the pavement, back up the bridge towards Tazuna. The red arms retreated and Naruto sprung over the side, with fury in his eyes. He raced towards the stumbling boy trying to get back up and slammed his fist into the boy's mask. It cracked under the intense weight, and Naruto smashed him into the ground. He stood over the boy's body and growled as he raised his hand to finish it. He paused an inch from the boy's face when he finally recognized him. "Go on," Haku weakly muttered, "please finish it." Naruto growled as he started tearing up. He brought his fist back, but it was caught firmly by Kakashi. The chakra burned at his skin, but Kakashi fought through the pain. "Naruto! He's finished. Stand down." Naruto wanted to argue. He wanted to scream and shout, anything to not think about what he saw. He wanted to ram his hand straight through the boy's throat, but it was not what his friends would have wanted him to do. He squeezed out more tears as he stood up, and removed himself from Haku's body. The red coat started to disappear, but his red eyes remained. Whether they were from the Kyuubi or from his tears, Kakashi couldn't say. Kakashi kept a wary eye on him, but he placed his hand on his shoulder. Haku just lay still as tears flowed from his eyes. "I'm sorry, Zabuza-sama. I failed you. Well, look what we have here." Everyone's heads turned down the bridge and finally laid their eyes on Gato and his crew of soldiers. He was standing directly in front of Zabuza's impaled body and clucking his tongue. "I guess you shinobi really are worth nothing," he said as he nudged at the blade lodged in Zabuza's chest. "Go to hell." Zabuza gargled as blood poured from his mouth. "Dear God, the bastard is still alive. What does it take to put you down?" He joked as he slapped him across the face. "Don't you dare touch him." Haku screamed down the bridge. "Oh, the mute finally decides to speak, does he?" Gato taunted. "Well, I'll enjoy watching my men make it up to you for breaking my arm earlier. Men tear who's left apart." The roar of the soldiers quickly died down as a malevolent feeling washed over them. The blonde kid next to the Konoha shinobi was glowing red as he growled at them. Gato took a step back as his horrid glare seemed to be directed straight at him. "So you are the one who had Inari's father killed?" Gato was speechless as he scooted back behind his men. Whatever the brat was doing was scaring the hell out of him. Gone was his fierce bravado, and he was left shivering in his pants. He had never felt so terrified in his life. "You're the reason all of this is happening. You're the reason they're gone." He roared and raced forward. He surged through the men, tearing apart anyone and everyone who stood in his way. They cried out in terror as the Crimson Demon was led upon them. Gato shook in horror at the gruesome sight and began running away from his entourage as fast as he could. Naruto shot him a single glance, while he snapped a man's arm and flung his tri-pronged kunai past the group towards Gato. The kunai sailed past his head, and, in a flash, he was standing directly in front of the man quaking in his boots. After a few seconds went by, Kakashi only stared at him in awe. There was no effect from the Hiration. Whatever you want, I'll give it to you, Gato pleaded. Money, power, women. Just leave me alone. If Naruto had been in his right state of mind, he would have taunted him for his pathetic behavior, but he wasn't the only one at the wheel right now. He ignored him as he grabbed the man's face in his hands. He raised him up in the air, and the man started crying out as the hand started to glow red and burn his face. Katon, Wrath's Inferno. Fire exploded from his hand, searing away any and all flesh that happened to be within its conic range. Gato could only scream for an instant before his face was blown out the back of his head. It lasted for several seconds before what was left of Gato's body dropped to the ground. The men took several steps back as they stood in horror of the kid standing before them. One guy pissed himself as the blonde directed his stare at him. They dropped their weapons in panic and raced towards the other side of the bridge. Unfortunately for them, this was the exact moment Inari arrived with his mob of villagers. They cheered at their victory as Naruto stared at Haku, who was dragging himself over to Zabuza's body. He started to take a step forward, but Kakashi caught his shoulder. No, let them have their final moments alone. Tears stung down Haku's face as Zabuza coughed up his last words. But sir, I can't. You can, and you LLL. Understand, me? He garbled. Haku's face stared at the ground, as he remained silent. Haku. The boy nodded his head and the missing Nin smiled. He leaned back against the wall as his eyes closed for the last time. I'm coming down to hell to knock the crap out of you myself, Gato, he thought as he slipped away. Naruto and Kakashi were silent as Haku knelt before his teacher. Naruto had tears streaming down his face. Not because of Zabuza, but because of his friends. He had been too slow. He had been. What the hell happened here? A voice cried out from the edge of the bridge. Naruto's heart stopped as he turned and faced down the bridge. Hinata was supporting Sasuke on her back. As she set him down, he could see the blood-stained bandages that covered his legs and shoulder. Naruto's lips started quivering as the waterworks started all over again. He took a few steps forward, before he was running at a full-on sprint and tackled both of them. God damn it! My legs! Watch what the hell you are doing, idiot! Sasuke roared as pain shot throughout his body. Naruto paid him no mind as he dragged both of them deeper into his embrace. Kakashi lightly smiled as he pulled his headband back over his eye. The battle of the bridge was over. Chapter 24, The Fog Lifts. An air of silence settled over Haku, as he sat along the docks. The only sounds were the waves gently crashing against the shore. It was a beautiful sight to behold. The afternoon sun was just beginning to set, and it reflected perfectly across the water. However, this beauty was lost on the boy as he contemplated on the growing hole he felt in his chest. He felt lost. He honestly didn't know what to do with himself now. He heard the wood creaking behind him, but made no movement as the blonde came up and sat beside him. They sat in silence as the two of them stared across the river at the sinking sunset. Sure is beautiful, Naruto whispered. Yes, I suppose it is. How are your burns healing? Better. Your friend Hinata-chan really does know her way with medicinal creams, he replied as he unconsciously rubbed his arms. Naruto seemed uncomfortable as he thought back to his fit of rage the day before. How are Sasuke-kun's legs? They'll heal. She did her best to heal the muscle, but he'll still need to see a real doctor. Hinata-chan is amazing, but she is not a professional. Since we won't get back to the village for a few days, he'll probably have to keep the scars. That's a shame, Haku commented. At least he'll be able to walk again. Thank you for not hitting his bones. According to Hinata-chan, even medical ninjutsu can't heal that. Haku simply nodded as the silence returned. They sat in peace as they watched the sun set slowly over the waves. Naruto turned his head, and looked him in the eyes. I think I owe you an apology. Whatever for? We were enemies trying to fulfill our own missions. Nothing more, nothing less. That's not true, Naruto said as he shook his head. Even when you got angry with us, you still didn't go for the kill shot. You are mistaken. If your friend hadn't moved at the last second, I would have impaled him. He survived on his own merit alone. Naruto was silent, before his voice softened. But that doesn't mean you wanted to kill us, does it? You still didn't finish him straight away after you immobilized him. Haku was silent as he stared at the waves. I don't like killing. I really abhor violence, but I understand that it is necessary. Zabuza-sama would always say I was too soft, yet he always kept me around. I think that just proved he cared. No. I was his weapon. He did not have room for any kind of weakness such as bonds or attachment. I thought you were the one to say caring for others was what makes us strong. Haku was silent at this and kept his head down. What was the last thing he told you? I would rather not say. Please. You helped me by sparing my friends. I want to be able to help you. Haku sighed as he turned his head to face him. He told me not to strike out against Kakashi-san. He respected his opponent's ability to best him, and he said he didn't want me throwing my life away on a vendetta of vengeance. There's something else, isn't there? Naruto prodded. Haku's lips didn't quiver, and his face was stone cold, not revealing a once of emotion. However, tears silently streamed down his face. He told me to live my life. That sounds like a good thing. No, I was a failure. I was just a simple tool for Zabuza-sama to use in his quest, and now I have no purpose. Bullshit. You are no tool, you are a human being. If you don't believe you have a purpose, you make one for yourself. It's not that easy. It's always that easy. Then what is your purpose? Naruto was quiet as he stared back over the water. For years, I've always been looked down on by the villagers. They have always hated me, and to be honest, I don't blame them. They were just scared and hurt from the torment they had to endure. So I always wanted to gain their attention. Even if it was negative, I just couldn't endure the silence. So, I goofed off. I pulled pranks. Any attention was better than none. So I decided I would make it so no one would be able to ignore me. I had planned on becoming Hokage so that everyone would have to acknowledge me, but I don't think that is a good reason anymore. What changed? I got to meet some special people. They were the first to acknowledge me, and see me for who I really am. They mean the world to me, and I would rather die than let them get hurt. I now understand that this is how the rest of the village feels with their own families and friends. How much pain they must have gone through. Now, I want to become Hokage so I can protect everyone, so they never have to worry about their connections being broken again. Haku was silent through his speech and was honored how deep his own words had seemed to sink into the boy. For the first time in a few days, Haku chuckled. What is it? You sound a bit like him. Like who? Zabuza-sama. Wah! He comically screamed as he backed away, only causing Haku to chuckle more. That's not something you want to hear. I don't want to be told I'm like homicidal assassin. He wanted to be a Kage too. Naruto stopped joking and stared at him in surprise. Really? Then why did he become a missing nin? He wanted to overthrow the current Kage. Oh, well, that explains it. It's a little more complicated than that. Right now, the Hidden Mist Village is not what it once was. The country is ravaged by the Mizukige's vendetta against Kekkei Genkai users. He has been waging a war for years in order to eradicate all of them. Naruto was furious. Meaningless loss of life always made him mad, but targeting Bloodlines users really struck a chord with him. Especially since both of his teammates fell in that category. Why isn't anyone doing anything to stop him? There are some, but they are heavily outnumbered by the loyalists. Some support him out of prejudice, others out of fear. Zabuza wanted to raise his own group to challenge the Mizukage, so that's why he took on jobs for people like Gato. You can't wage a war without funds. Why didn't he team up with those other guys? Haku chuckled. Zabuza-sama did not play well with others. He never liked sharing, and he wouldn't be satisfied unless he was in charge. He couldn't stand working under someone else. Well, can you? Pardon? Naruto stood up as he offered his hand to the boy. You said you have no purpose. Well, here's a purpose Zabuza would be proud of. Get out there, join that resistance, and help kick that bastard of a Kage's ass. Haku stared up at him and chuckled. It's not that simple. Like I said, it's always that simple. You just have to be brave enough to take the first step and do it. You better believe that I'm going to help you too. One of these days, I'm going to head out there and show that bastard a thing or two. Just you wait. Haku raised an eyebrow. A genin taking on a Kage? You are impressive, Naruto-kun, but you would be pounded into dust. Naruto flashed him a grin. Now there's a smile. Give me some time. I'm going to surpass all of the Hokage, and I never go back on my word. As soon as I'm able, I'll head out there and help Kiri get back on track. That's my promise to you. Haku lightly smiled as he took the boy's hand and rose to his feet. He gave one last look over the water, before they both headed back towards the house. Thank you, Zabuza-sama. I will make sure your dream for a united Kiri becomes a reality. The blonde was walking next to him with his hands behind his head and a bright smile lighting up his face. And thank you Naruto-kun, for helping me realize that I can still serve my master even in death. He steeled his eyes as he buried the sadness burning in his chest. He had a new mission, and he was going to make sure it was accomplished. I'm coming to find you Mei-sama. The door creaked open as Hinata entered the room. After a lot of arguing and a not-so-subtle juken strike to his stomach, Sasuke agreed to back down and was confined to his bed. Hinata had done her best to work on the holes in his legs, but she could only do so much. She was certain that with the work she had done, a professional medical nin would be able to fully heal his legs. Due to the time between their departure and arrival back at the village, there were definitely going to be scars. He would be perfectly functional, but he was now going to have a permanent reminder of his trip to Wave Country. She sat down next to his bed as she activated her Byakugan. His heart rate was normal, and everything seemed to be fine. She had made him take a nap, and planned to wake him shortly before dinner. She pulled up a chair near the base of his bed and sat down. He would be just fine. He would be okay. He would. She groaned as she held her head. She had been trying to distract herself from her thoughts by trying to find some problem with Sasuke's health. Anything to keep her from revisiting what she saw under the bridge. Sadly, there was nothing wrong. Nothing to keep her distracted. She sighed as the memories came back to her. It was initially fuzzy when she first opened her eyes. She couldn't focus too much, and the back of her head felt numb. She had sensed someone to her left, and tried to make out who it was. Her vision started to clear just as whoever it was disappeared, but she had managed to see one characteristic that still made her shiver. Those horns. They were the same shape as the figure she had seen all those years ago in the Hyuga monument. She had spent years reassuring herself she had gotten over it. She even went down there on her own volition for crying out loud. She had spent who knows how many hours in that bottom floor, but that one glimpse of the figure almost reverted her back to that scared little girl who stumbled across something way over her head. Almost. There was still that part of her that was scared, but it was now overshadowed by pure curiosity. Why would that figure show up now? Why here? Was there something special about this place? Or was it just something special about her? She unconsciously reached into her pouch and pulled out the green scroll that followed her wherever she went. She rubbed her fingers along the parchment as she gazed over the strange letterings. What is it that is so special about this? What is so important about these store dash? Her breath caught in her lungs. Her eyes widened as she noticed something. The kanji had changed again. So soon, her mind raced at the possibilities as she rolled open the scroll. Sure enough, below the previous lines was an all-new section. It even had a new title. Hinata's eyes scanned over the contents of the page, as the next chapter was revealed. The Sage and His Sons. The War of the Sun and Moon. After the sage had traveled and healed the wounds upon the earth from his monumental battle, he finally returned to his home. His first child was a carefree and loving child, wise beyond his years. He understood the importance of patience, and he was skilled in everything he attempted. The second child was just as loving and even more boisterous. He found wonder in everything around him, and was always curious to explore. However, he lacked the natural skill that both his father and brother possessed. The brothers held nothing but affection for one another. The younger brother adored his sibling, and strived to measure up to his natural talent. They studied under the teachings of their father, and the older son not only excelled in the art of ninshu, but he pushed it to new heights. Over time, a shadow was cast over the older brother. Like his father before him, his eyes awoke and glowed red like the lunar eclipse. He grew cold and focused only on strength. This was his path. The younger brother struggled and struggled, but eventually, with the help of others, he was able to rival his brother in strength. Though he did not inherit the eyes of his father, he instead received his life force and will that burned like the sun. He grew compassionate and cooperated with others. This was his path. When it came time for the sage to name his successor, the younger brother expected his talented brother to receive the mantle. Instead, the sage agreed with his younger son's beliefs and passed his position on to him. Fueled by anger and jealousy, the older brother lashed out the few who were close to him. He pushed his power beyond its previous limits, and reached the second stage. Just like his grandmother before him, the older brother was corrupted by his focus on power. Though his eyes never reached their third stage, he challenged his brother and father for the title of succession. The brothers clashed in both body and ideals as they fought for how the future would be run. One believing that compassion was the key to peace, the other believing in force. With the support of those close to him, the younger brother triumphed over the older brother and forced him into banishment. Years later, as the sage lay on his deathbed, the prodigal son returned to his father's side. Instead of reconciling their differences, the older brother lashed out at his father, claiming that his cowardly approach would never bring true peace. Then he made a solemn vow. He promised that no matter how many lifetimes it took, he would undo his father's work and force the world onto its true path. When the younger brother heard of his brother's comments, he made his own vow. No matter how many lifetimes it took, he would continue his feud with his brother until, one day, they could finally reach an agreement and lead the world to a successful future together. To this day, their spirits travel on from generation to generation, never at peace, as each attempt yields the same result. Hinata tried to absorb this information as it rattled around in her head. With every chapter the scroll revealed, the more complicated the story became. Just what did all of this mean? What did it have to do with her? Hey Hinata-chan. Watch a reading? Her face turned pure crimson as she yelped and scurried across the room. Her chest heaved as she stared back at Naruto, who was leaning over behind her chair. He had snuck up behind her and stuck his face right next to hers. Hee. I'm sorry Hinata-chan. Didn't mean to startle you like that, he chuckled as he rubbed his head. Naruto-kun, please don't sneak up on me like that. You know I don't like to be startled. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Tsunami wanted me to tell you guys dinner will be ready in 10 minutes, plus I was just wondering what you guys were up to. I guess the team's still out cold, huh? She nodded as she caught her breath. She couldn't get rid of her faint blush as she turned toward Sasuke's bed. Yes. I placed him in an induced sleep so he wouldn't move. If he tried to walk, it could further damage his injury. He hates sitting still, so I figured putting under would be the best way to wait. Naruto jumped a little as Hinata shrieked. He was more than a little shocked. That was probably the loudest he had ever heard her been. Her eyes were wide as she stared back and forth between the scroll she had dropped on the ground and her blonde crush. She raised a trembling finger as she pointed at the scroll. You mean you can see that? What? You mean the scroll? Of course I can. Why wouldn't I? He asked as he gave her a weird look. She scrambled back across the room as she lifted up the scroll and held it in front of his face. You are telling me you can actually see this? The words and everything. Naruto raised an eyebrow as he glanced at the page. Yeah, I can. The tale of the rabbit goddess. Sounds like a fairy tale. Hinata could only stare at him with her eyes wide, and he began to feel worried. Hinata-chan. You're freaking me out. Is something wrong? Hinata's mind was racing as she tried to process what was happening. What could this possibly mean? No one else has ever been able to see it before. Not even Tu-san. How can he see it? Naruto reached out his hand and gently knocked on her head. Hello. Earth to Hinata. I need some context here. She bit her lip as she stared down at the scroll. Her hands trembled as she handed him the scroll. See, could you please read it? He gave her a look, but took the scroll anyway. If she was having a problem, he was certainly going to try his damnedest to help. His panic attack on the bridge from the possibility of losing either of them had made him feel even more protective of them than before. She was acting really strange. Then again, Hinata was a strange girl, but that's what he liked about her. He offered her a smile as he took the scroll and started reading it over. It was a little uncomfortable, as Hinata's eyes never left him. He shook off the odd feeling as he read over the stories. Blah, blah, blah rabbit goddess. Blah, blah, blah sage. Blah, blah, blah. He paused as he read about the younger brother. Something oddly clicked with him as he read it over. He couldn't explain it, but something about it felt very familiar. When he was finished, he rolled up the scroll and offered it back to her. Cool stories, Hinata-chan. I especially liked the one about the brothers. That younger one was cool, even if he was kind of a sissy. He chuckled as she slowly took the scroll from his hands. She didn't believe it. Someone else could see the scroll. Tears started streaming down her face, and she stared down at the ground. Naruto was instantly alarmed as Hinata started crying. What do I do? What do I do? I'm not good with stuff, he panicked. He bent down to see her face, and he was surprised when he saw she was smiling. Tears of joy streamed down her face as her body shook. She was so happy she could barely move. She really wasn't crazy. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Hinata-chan, what's wrong? He desperately asked as he put his hands on her shoulders. She surprised him when she grabbed him and pulled him into a deep hug. He was kind of confused, but he returned it anyways. He was more than a little worried, as she shivered against him. After a minute or two, she released him and wiped away her tears. A light blush crossed her cheeks as she realized what she had just done. She sniffled as she wiped her nose. Thank you, Naruto-kun. No prob. Although I don't really understand what I did, he responded. Now, can you tell me what's wrong? You're worrying me. She chuckled as she gripped the scroll harder. You just reassured me is all. Ha! She giggled as she stared at his face. He was like a dog as he tilted his head in confusion. It's a long story. I'll make time. He really was too sweet. Let's just say. Not everyone is supposed to be able to see what's written on this scroll, and it's just reassuring that someone else can. You mean like a security seal? He was confused. What could be so special about some fairy tale? She giggled, as she was the one to knock on his head. Everything is seals with you, isn't it? Hee hee. I guess it is, he chuckled as he rubbed his head in embarrassment. So is it some clan thing? He asked. She nodded as she rubbed her thumb against the scroll. You could certainly call it that. He opened his mouth to ask her another question, but he was cut off as Tsunami called from the kitchen. Supper's ready. Naruto-kun, could you please be a dear and help me with setting the table? Coming. He shouted back. He turned back to her and gripped her shoulder. We'll talk later. Looking forward to it, she smiled back. He flashed her a grin as he started heading back down the hall. She stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. Someone else could actually see the scroll. She didn't have to keep doing mental gymnastics just to talk to someone about her ridiculous problem. Hinata! Kakashi called down the hall, please wake up the sleeping wonder. He's going to need to eat. Hi-sensei. She responded as she broke out of her stupor. She walked over to the bed as she gently pressed her fingers on his forehead. She streamed her chakra through her body and into her fingers as she gently spread it through his head. His eyes flickered, and he groaned as started to get up. Hey Hinata, he muttered as he rubbed his eyes, was the dobe just here? I swear, I could hear him even in my sleep. Isn't there anywhere I can go just to get a small reprieve? She giggled as he sat back against the headboard. How are you feeling? Stiff, he responded as he rubbed his neck, but certainly better than I felt yesterday. You certainly know your stuff. She smiled and bowed a little in response to his compliment. He glanced down at her hands and noticed a tiny green scroll. What have you got there? He asked. Her voice caught in her throat as she tried to respond. Again? Could it be possible he could see it too? Could everyone see it now? Questions were racing in her head, as she handed it off to him. Would you like to read it? He shrugged his shoulders as he took the scroll from her hands. As he read over it, he couldn't help but notice the stares she sent him as she gathered up his crutches and cleaned up the floor of anything in his way. It seemed like just some classical story he had never heard of. I didn't know Hinata was into mythology, he thought as he scrolled down the page. Like his teammate, he stopped as he came across the section with the brothers. Something bugged him as he read over the description of the older brother. He couldn't tell what, but he felt some sort of connection to this story. He handed it back to her without a word. Well, it's alright I guess. The sun and moon story was alright I suppose. I didn't know you were into this historical stuff. She was silent, as she seemed to stare off into space. He raised an eyebrow as he waved his hand in front of her face. Hinata, eep. Sorry, I got lost in thought there. But yes, I enjoy looking into historical records and stories. We have a vast collection of them within the clan's library. He humphed as he brought his legs over the side of the bed. He took the crutches from her, and she helped him get on his feet. He nearly slipped, but she was right there to catch him. Thanks, he muttered a little embarrassed. No problem Sasuke-kun. Now, let's head down for dinner. As they headed towards the door, Sasuke fought with an idea in his head before making a decision. Hey, he called to her. She paused and turned back as she reached for the door handle. My clan also has a library within the clan grounds. I don't really go in there much anymore. I only go there for an occasional ninjutsu or taijutsu book, but it is full of other historical stuff you might like. Feel free to drop by any time if you feel like it. She was surprised by his kind gesture, and she offered him a kind smile and bowed to him. Thank you, Sasuke-kun. That is quite generous. Consider it thanks for fixing my legs. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't even be able to continue as shinobi. They walked out of the room, and surprised when they found Kakashi standing in the doorway. I was wondering what was holding you. Inari and Naruto just wanted me to make sure you were on your way. They are foaming at the mouth ready to dig in. Hinata giggled as Sasuke scoffed. Kakashi let Sasuke pass, and was about to leave when Hinata caught his arm. Sensei, could you wait a minute? He was surprised, but nodded. Sasuke sent them a look, but Kakashi just waved at him to go ahead. He shrugged and continued hobbling off down the hall. What's up? You seem a little more upbeat than the last time I saw you. I just got a big weight off my chest. I was able to share something important with both Naruto and Sasuke. That's good to hear. Mind sharing it with me? She nodded as she stretched the scroll out in front of her. Seconds passed and she was confused, when he didn't move to take it out of her hands. Sensei. You can take the scroll now. What scroll? Her eyes widened as she gazed into his visible eye. His eye seemed fogged over, and he didn't really seem to notice what she was talking about. He simply stared overhead, just like Tu-san. This made her feel worried all over again. This didn't make any sense. The boys had been able to see it. Why was this still happening? She hung her head in defeat as she tucked the scroll back in her kunai pouch. Kakashi's eye returned to normal and he treated her with an eye smile. Oh, there you are, Hinata. Come on, Tsunami has supper ready. Inari and Naruto just wanted me to make sure you were on your way. They are foaming at the mouth ready to dig in. Hi sensei, she replied somberly as she walked past him out the door. He frowned as he watched her lurch up the hall. He knew something was wrong after their encounter on the bridge, but she hadn't been acting this strangely. Something else must have happened. He stared back into the room at Sasuke's sheets. Had they gotten into an argument? But they had seemed so cordial as he left the room. He made a mental note to keep an eye on it as he closed the door to the bedroom. Chapter 25, The Fog Lifts, Part 2. He was standing out in the middle of a muddy brown sea. Off in the distance was the kind of island you would typically see on a postcard, with white sandy beaches and palm trees everywhere. To the outside observer, it would have been the picture of paradise if it weren't for the steaming sea of brown water. Strangely shaped objects floated out across the water, which turned out to be bits and pieces of food. Everywhere you looked there were sliced onions, mushrooms, bits of corn, and noodles, which stretched out like seaweed. Every now and then a massive cut of pork would breach from the broth below like a magnificent fish before plunging into the depths below. It was a sea of ramen. Naruto smiled in his sleep as his drool slathered across his pillow. You bet I'd like seconds, he slurred as he rolled over. He was blissfully unaware as a dark shadow silently crept into the room. The individual froze as one of the room's occupants let out a loud snore. Tazuna had graciously given up his room on the ground floor for Sasuke to recover, so he had joined Kakashi and Naruto upstairs. The quiet figure tiptoed over their prone forms as it made its way towards the sleeping blonde. It hovered above him before slowly kneeling on the ground. Naruto-kun. Naruto-kun, it whispered as nudged at him. He only snored louder as he rolled away from the person. The person next tried to shake him awake, but nothing seemed to work. It sighed as chakra began to swell in its hands. It gave a sharp jab to Naruto's side, and quickly covered his mouth as he shot awake. He gave his attacker a wild look, which turned to confusion as he faintly made out the familiar form in the moonlight. Hinata-chan? He said in a muffled voice. She nodded and raised her finger to her lips. She whispered her apologies as she lowered her hand from his mouth. Hinata-chan, he whined, what time is it? I was having the perfect dream. Whyyyyyy. I'm sorry Naruto-kun, but I really need to talk with you. He shrugged off his sleepiness as he noticed the look in her eyes. She wouldn't have woken him unless it was important. He stretched his arms above his head and nodded, before rising as quietly as possible. They both tiptoed out of the room, and shut the door without a sound. For several seconds, the room remained silent before a lone eye creaked open and stared at the door. Naruto followed Hinata downstairs and was surprised, when she took a right and headed down the hall towards Sasuke's room. He was surprised to see Sasuke already awake and leaning against the bed rest, when he entered the room. The light from the candle on his, or rather Tazuna's, night table cast shadows across the room as Hinata shut the door. Sasuke sent Naruto a glare as he popped a squat at the end of his bed, but made no comment as Hinata joined them as well. He winced as he pulled up his legs so they were crossed, giving everyone enough room on the bed. "Alright, what's up?" Naruto whispered as he settled against the wall. Hinata seemed more nervous than usual, as reached into her bag and pulled out the green scroll she had shown them earlier and set it on the bed. "I believe I need to apologize," she whispered as she twisted the sheets in her hands. "I have been keeping some secrets from you, and it is not fair for both of you. You two are the most important people in my life, and I think I should share some things with you." Both were silent as different thoughts raced through each boy's mind. Sasuke was simply curious what could have her so worked up. Naruto felt guilty as her words cut through his mind. "I have been keeping some secrets from you, and it is not fair for both of you." He unconsciously touched his stomach as he thought back to his promise before the trip. It had been easy to say that he would tell them everything after this mission was over, but actually doing so was another thing entirely. "What is it?" Sasuke asked as he leaned forward. Hinata twiddled her fingers, as she fought for the words to say. It's a long story, and it may take some time." "We're listening," Sasuke pressed her. She took a deep breath and she started her tale of her encounter in the library. The more she talked, the more she started spilling more and more of everything she had faced since that day. An hour passed as she described everything she had faced over the years: the initial encounter in the library, the ghostly figure, how the scroll seemed to follow her everywhere she went, its effects on others, her research into it, and the reappearance of the horned figure under the bridge. They were silent as each of them processed the information in their own way. Sasuke was highly intrigued by the existence of a Hyuga monument similar to the Uchiha's stone tablet. Was there any connection there? Naruto remained silent as Sasuke commented, "That's a lot to take in." After a few seconds, he turned to Naruto and shot him a look. "You're being awfully quiet." Naruto didn't seem to react as he kept his head down. "Sorry, just processing things." Hinata was silent as she glanced between the two. She had never been more nervous in her life. She was going to stretch the hem of her shirt if she kept twisting it. She couldn't read their expressions, and she was incredibly scared of what they would say. What if they didn't believe her? "Are you sure Kakashi-sensei had the same reaction as your father?" Sasuke asked as he picked up the scroll, rolling it over in his hands. She slowly nodded her head. "Yes. I have tried multiple times to get through to my father, but nothing ever works. I have been able to simply copy down the stories and he'll be able to read those, but whenever I actually bring up the scroll or talk about it, his eyes just seem to fog over. And he never remembers anything." Sasuke asked as he gazed through the stories again. "Never. It will be like we never even talked, or we had simply discussed something else." Sasuke was silent as he set the scroll back down and closed his eyes. His silence hurt, but she was even more concerned about Naruto, who had not said a thing since her story. "Fine then. So, what are we going to do about this strange figure?" Sasuke asked as he crossed his arms. The shock was evident on her face as she whipped her head at him. "You actually believe me? I don't see why not. We've only become close over the past few months, but I've known you for years. You are not the type to just make stuff up. You are very honest and kind, almost to a fault. You wouldn't come to us unless this was important to you." She got choked up as he sent her a light smirk. "Besides, your story is not so crazy after all. Believe it or not, the Uchiha have something similar." Relief changed to confusion as she waited for him to elaborate. If she was willing to share secrets of her clan, the least he could do was share some of his. Hidden within the clan's grounds is a stone tablet that has been passed down through the Uchiha line for generations. It apparently talks about how to fully awaken our eyes, and some supposed path for the clan. "Have you read it?" He seemed a little miffed as he stared at the wall. "No, but someone has told me what parts of what it says." The image of those red eyes flashed through his mind as he reflected that one night. "However, now that I've awakened my Sharingan, I can start to read it once I get back." She smiled and nodded at him as they turned back to their other teammate. He had been uncharacteristically silent this entire time. "Naruto-ku. I've got something to confess as well," he cut her off. The others seemed surprised by his outburst. He glanced up and met their eyes as he took a deep breath. He lingered on Hinata's eyes before he let out a sigh. If she could have the courage to open up to them, then so could he. Hinata had to fight hard not to faint as he started to take off his shirt. "Dobe, what the hell are you doing?" "Not now, Sasuke," he quietly replied as he set his shirt to the side and clasped his hands together. Taken back from the blonde's tone and lack of honorific, he remained quiet as the blonde started channeling chakra. Naruto-kun, I don't quite understand. Hinata cut herself off as dark markings began to appear along his stomach. They stared in mild curiosity at his midriff as he opened his eyes. Another seal, I take it? Sasuke asked as he inspected the intricate squiggles. Naruto nodded before Sasuke asked, and just what have you done to yourself this time? I didn't do this. I never would have wanted this, Naruto muttered as the markings disappeared and he put his shirt back on. Hinata was getting concerned as he let out a weak chuckle and gave them a light smile. I hope you guys are up for another long story. Kakashi was motionless as he leaned against the wall outside the room, as Naruto began his lengthy discussion about the Kyuubi and his childhood. He didn't mean to spy, but you just don't sneak out of bed at 1 in the morning without arousing some suspicion. He was so proud that both of them found the courage to finally open up to the others, especially Naruto. However, it was out of his hands now. It was up to his teammates to either accept him or push him away. Although, from the soft grunt of two forms colliding with each other and the sounds of Hinata's tearful mutterings, it was safe to assume things were going over well. All that was left was for Sasuke to decide to join the part and open up as well. However, he was going to be the toughest nut to crack. Kakashi could only hope that listening to the other two sharing their stories would help him decide to as well. Hinata had tackled him against the wall in a bear hug. Tears fell from her face as she repeated, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Thank you. He chuckled as he rubbed the back of her head. It was a better response than he could have ever hoped for. He turned and looked at Sasuke, who still seemed to be thinking it over. Is it going to be a problem? He cautiously asked. Sasuke was silent before he sighed and gave him a bored look. I suppose not. You're too stupid to be some conniving, evil fox spirit. Naruto grinned from ear to ear as he spread his left arm out for Sasuke to join the hug. Sasuke only sent him a glare. I don't do hugs. Without removing her face from Naruto's chest, Hinata's arm shot out and grabbed Sasuke's shirt, before dragging him into the huddle. He groaned and rolled his eyes as Naruto linked his arm around his back, squeezing him into the hug. Naruto chuckled and Hinata giggled as they all clamped together on the bed. Sasuke's head rolled backwards and his eyes held a dead look. Great. We're really close and whatever. Teamwork. Friendship. Yada, yada. Can you let go now? You're starting to hurt my legs. Hinata shook her head. 10 more seconds. Naruto giggled at the response, before they finally all separated from each other. Great. Now that that's out of our system, who's next? Sasuke? Naruto asked as he turned towards the brunette expectantly. Sasuke's more upbeat attitude evaporated instantly as he crossed his arms and sent him a dark glare. No. But team. I said no. I am not talking about it. Please, Sasuke-kun. It really will help, Hinata chimed in. He glared back at their pleading faces, but he would not waver. He trusted them, but he wasn't sure if he was really ready to open up about that night. Not yet at least. Maybe someday, but not today, he said in a tone that ended the discussion. Fine, Naruto said as he stuck his tongue at him, much to Hinata's amusement. She gave him a soft gaze. They had not been able to break through his rigid shell, but at least it was a start. The cracks were already beginning to form. Now, back to my original question. What are we going to do about the horned figure? They all became more serious as they shifted back to their original topic. I don't know. I have scoured through the Hyuga records and I have never been able to find anything about anyone similar. I had thought he would be limited only to that room, but I don't understand how I could have seen him here. Have you ever considered that the figure you keep seeing and the stories in that scroll could be connected? Naruto asked, much to the surprise of Hinata. Is it possible he shivered as he said, ghostly figure and a character from one of the other stories are one and the same? Hinata was a little taken back. The thought had truly never crossed her mind. She had always tried to push the memory of the ghostly figure out of her mind, and focused on finding a historical connection to the woman from first story. Within a week, she now had 2 more chapters to work with, and even more characters brought into the familial story. This presented even more opportunities for her to find a connection. No, I had only ever looked for a connection with the first story. The other stories didn't reveal themselves until just this past week as we headed here and the other day. Well, then, let's work from there. We can split up the work during our spare time. Naruto and Sasuke smirked at her. You got us to help you now. You don't have to handle everything alone. Shikaka Nara's words danced through her head as she gave them a short bow. Thank you so much. Sasuke leaned back against the bed as Naruto let out a loud yawn. Now I think that is enough emotional drama for one night, he muttered as he stretched his arms. We got a long day of travel ahead of us, so let's at least try to get some shut-eye. Sounds good to me, Sasuke said as he violently shoved the blonde off the foot of the bed. Hinata giggled at their antics as she got off the bed and put out the candle next to the bed. She bade Sasuke goodnight and made Naruto mutter out something similar, before they started heading back down the hallway. They said their goodbyes and headed back to their respective rooms. As they had left the room, they didn't notice the silent figure drop from the ceiling. He glanced back at the door to Sasuke's room and sighed. Ah well, you couldn't win every battle at once, but at least it was a start. Things would certainly be easier from here on out. No more hiding, and no more secrets between them. Well, he had more than his fair share of secrets. Some regarding his own past, and some regarding theirs. However, Kakashi frowned as he stared down the stairs. Something was wrong. He couldn't place his finger on it, but he felt like he was forgetting something. He was glad Hinata finally got the secret of the Hyuga ring off her chest, but he felt like some details were missing. He was an ex-NBU and 9 times out of 10, if your gut was telling you something, it was right. Was there something he had missed? Inari couldn't help but sniffle as they said their final goodbyes. The bridge was finally complete. Tazuna had needed some help from Naruto's shadow clones to help repair the damage to the support columns, but now bridge was all set for use. Naruto ruffled the young boy's hair as he flashed him a smile. Haku smiled fondly at the two of them as he stood behind Tazuna. After prying Inari off his leg, Naruto walked over to him and they shook hands. What are you planning on doing with that thing? He asked, motioning towards the massive sword strapped to Haku's pack. I am going to offer it as a gift to the Kiri resistance and to prove that I come in good faith. I'm sure their leader would be thrilled to add another of the 7 legendary swords to their arsenal. The appearance of them can help motivate their troops. Stay safe. I don't want to come back to help, and find out you did something reckless and sacrificed yourself for someone. No promises. Naruto gave him one final smile, before he nodded and turned back to the group. Alright Sasuke, let's get this over with. What are you talking about? A smile crept over his face as he summoned a clone and handed it his backpack. Oh, didn't Kakashi-sensei tell you? Sasuke sent a hurt look at Kakashi, who shrugged. Must have slipped my mind. We don't want you hurting your legs on the way back to Konoha, so Naruto has kindly volunteered to carry you. What? More like threatened, Naruto muttered under his breath, as he thought back to his talk to Kakashi earlier that morning. He shivered as walked over and fought Sasuke to remove his backpack. I do not need your help, Dobe. I can walk on my own. Sure, you can, Kakashi chimed in, but in case you forgot, we have a mission quota to fulfill if you guys ever want to enter the Chunin exams. Allowing you to walk by yourself will only eat up more time. Sasuke stopped struggling and cursed. He sighed in defeat and handed the waiting clone his backpack. He growled as Naruto knelt in front of him. Don't worry Sasuke. It will be fun. It's just a piggyback ride you can't escape from. 4 hours. Sasuke slapped him in the back of the head, before he climbed onto his back. Naruto growled as he hoisted him up. I'd watch that if I were you Sasuke team. Who knows how many road bumps we could run into along the way. Sasuke seemed to pause before bopping him on the head again. He would probably face some retaliation for that later, but, for now, it was totally worth it. They all gave Haku, Tazuna, and his family one last wave as they finally headed back home. They would be the first to cross the fully constructed and newly minted Great Naruto Bridge. As they headed off into the distance, Haku turned to Tazuna and bowed. Thank you for your hospitality. I appreciate your forgiveness and allowing me a place to stay. Tazuna chuckled. Think nothing of it. Just give me a head-ups if someone else hires you to kill me. He barked out laughing, and Tsunami sent him a glare. After he calmed down, he asked, so where are you headed? Haku turned back towards the direction of town. I am catching a ship to cross to Kiri in an hour. I will begin my investigation into the resistance once I arrive. I have a war to enter. His eyes held a new determination as he stared off towards the harbor. I am coming, Mai-sama. I will help you rebuild our country. It was a lovely day as 2 individuals sat outside of a tea shop. The weather was perfect, and autumn was just around the corner. The raven-haired one took a gentle sip of his tea, as he casually flipped through the newspaper. He made sure every Wednesday to acquire a copy of the same paper. He would give a short glance over the front page, before he calmly flipped through the personals section until he glanced down at the bottom left-hand corner of the last page. Some days it would be a simple motivational image or an ad for some obscure company. Today, it read, "Masks for sale. These masks cannot be found anywhere else. Want orange? You got it. Spiral design. No problem." The man's face remained unresponsive as he read through the message once again. He carefully folded up the paper and prepared to get up. "Hey, if you're done with that, can I have it?" His partner asked with a toothy grin. "I want to read the comics." He handed him the paper as the other man chuckled. "You have no sense of humor, Itachi. It's quite hard having to be the only one to lighten the mood." "If that is what you call humor," he calmly responded. Kisame faked a gasp. "Did my ears just deceive me, or did you just attempt to crack a joke? Let me make sure cats and dogs aren't falling from the sky." Itachi ignored him as he pushed in his chair. "Excuse me. I need to take care of something. I'll be back in a moment." "It's the kung pao chicken we had the other night, isn't it? I told you it would give you indigestion," Kisame cackled. Itachi sent him a glare, which the larger man only responded with a wide grin. He started reading through the confidentials as Itachi headed off down the street. He had a message to send. Chapter 26, Divide and Conquer. "For the last time, Danzo, I refuse to allow that to happen." The tension in the room was palpable, and some of the select few ANBU allowed to listen in on the conversation were starting to sweat from the pure presence resonating from the imposing figures. Neither was willing to back down on this matter. "It is an opportunity that will never happen again. I will not allow the chance to introduce a Kekai Toda into Konoha to be dismissed due to your senile old heart," Danzo growled as he banged his cane on the ground. "It is called having a conscience. I will not allow such a young child to be used as a breeder just for possibility that the bloodline limit would skip over her and move on to her children." "Fine. Then what of the boy? We confirmed from his blood work that he will certainly inherit the ability. We should be setting up candidates." "The boy is a child." The Hokage roared, his glare boring deep into the eye of his bandaged friend. The remaining occupants of the room remained quiet as they watched this struggle of power persist. They both knew the Hokage would make the final decision in the matter, but Danzo did have a point and the Hokage knew it. It was too good of an opportunity to pass up, but he just couldn't force himself to allow it. Konoha prided itself with refraining from those particular barbaric acts, unlike certain villages. He would not allow the village or his heart to be tainted by such a practice. The tall man leaning against the wall coughed to gather everyone's attention. "How about a compromise?" "I completely agree with Sensei. We cannot and will not use a child just for breeding purposes. That being said, Danzo is right as well. This is a very useful opportunity that would be foolish to let slip out of hand. At the very least, we should take DNA samples and keep them on record. That way, no matter what happens to the kids, we have the option hidden safely away. That way, in the event that Sensei or any future Kage believes we should introduce the bloodline, it will be possible to do so." Danzo seemed disgruntled, but could not argue with the logic. He would have much preferred introducing the limit as soon as possible, but having it on record was better than not having it at all, especially with how difficult it would be to argue this with Hiruzen. The Hokage sighed and nodded his head. He didn't like it, but it was a much better alternative. "All right then," Jiraiya said as he pushed off the wall. "Now with that taken care of, let's move on to the next problem. What to do with the kids?" Hamura turned her gaze to her old teammate. "How is Kitsune's investigation coming along?" "Moderately. He has been trying to find any connection to the ANBU agents responsible for the family's deaths, but he isn't getting very far. If we ever plan to bring this up to the Otsutsuki, I want an outlet other than us for him to focus his rage. Kitsune is waiting to hear back from his sources in other villages, while he interrogating the Zaofu clansmen we have locked away. How come the Yamanaka's scan hasn't revealed anything?" Kohara chimed in. "It is very troubling that someone has been able to resist their jutsu." "Indeed, although the answer is more simple than you'd think. The man has a seal planted inside the back of his mouth that forcefully triggers his mutation abilities whenever somebody tries to access his mind. His brain is completely altered to metal, which makes it impossible for the Inoichi to access his hippocampus." The Hokage shot Jiraiya a glance. "I was hoping you could take a look at that while you are here." Jiraiya nodded. "I'll see what I can do. But why go through such levels of secrecy?" Danzo muttered, "There is no reason for a seal of that magnitude or risk someone so valuable to a clan's revival unless the mission was of the utmost importance." "Something doesn't add up," Jiraiya agreed. "I concur. That is why Ibiki has been on him day and night. The prisoner is quick to anger and prone to lashing out, but is surprisingly very tight-lipped about his mission. There is more to his activities than just stealing some documents, but we are getting off topic. Like I said, I want to hold off from making a final decision regarding the children until Kitsune's investigation is complete." The room was silent before Jiraiya raised his head. "And what of the other perpetrator? The one in the orange mask?" Danzo and Sarutobi shared a quick glance before he responding, "This is the other important issue I wish to discuss. Based on Kitsune's report, we have reason to believe that the masked individual could possibly be an Uchiha." Silence fell over the room as the ANBU in the corners felt their hearts stop. "Not possible. The only two left are Itachi and his younger brother," Koharu said as she shook her head. "Not quite," the Sandai muttered as he sat back in his chair. "Based on new evidence, we now have reason to believe that Itachi Uchiha had assistance when he massacred his clan." Jiraiya squinted his eyes as he stared at his teacher. "From what source?" "I am not at liberty to say," was his only response. After placing his ad in the newspaper, he had only had to wait 2 days before he received a message tied to the ankle of a crow. It was very short and contained only one sentence: "I had help." Obscure as ever, Jiraiya muttered as he shot a quick glance at Danzo, who he noted made no comment on such a discovery. "Anyway, you haven't answered my question. What are we going to do with the children?" The Hokage took a puff of his pipe before he responded. "For now, nothing. We can't risk drawing undue attention to them from the other villages or civilians. I'll see to it that we acquire a more in-depth blood sample to place in storage. As the Chunin exams start getting underway, I'll have an ANBU shadow them in case someone else knows something we don't. Danzo, I want you focusing your efforts into looking into the identity of this masked Uchiha. I know we scoured the records for anyone who might have been out of the village at the time, but apparently we missed someone. Look for anyone who might have been presumed Kia around the time of the attack." Danzo nodded. "Consider it done." "Good. That is all. You are all dismissed." The elders rose from their chairs and headed out the door, one by one, leaving the master and his pupil alone in the office. The Hokage glanced towards the dark shadows in the corners and said, "You too." There was a swirl of wind, and silence once again settled over the office. Hiruzen sighed as he leaned his head back into the headrest. "I apologize that had to be the first thing you had to face when you got home." "Don't sweat it, sensei. I'm more worried about you. This much stress at your age can't be good for you." The Hokage chuckled as he opened one eye and glanced at his student. "That would be thanks to your rambunctious godson, who can't seem to keep himself out of trouble." A grin split apart on the old sage's face. "What has he done now?" As I should have expected, their first official C-rank mission escalated rather drastically. Not only do they topple a monopoly within the region, they faced down and killed one of the 7 legendary swordsmen of the mist and simply let his accomplice walk scot-free away with the sword. Not content with stopping there, Naruto seemed to have influenced the accomplice to go off and join the Kiri rebellion. That boy and his team are becoming more and more of a headache than I bargained for. Jiraiya barked with laughter, and Hiruzen shot him a mock glare. Can you imagine the diplomatic nightmare it would be if the Mizukage found out we aided and encouraged a highly powerful Kekai Genkai user to fight against him? I'm still dealing from the last international incident he almost caused. Jiraiya chuckled as his laughter died down. From what you've told me, he's becoming just as much of a sealing expert as his father was. The hawk nodded. Indeed he is. It's remarkable how far he's progressed without any aid. Minato at least had you and Kushina, but Naruto has been studying all on his own. Jiraiya was silenced by that comment, and sent his teacher a curious look. Well, maybe he doesn't have to anymore. He leaned on the desk and sent his teacher a grin. What does the brat have set up for the next 2 weeks? 1 day later. Ria swept the floor as yet another hour ticked away at the nagging clock above the register. She had been working at this store for over 2 years now. It was nothing special, but not exactly a dump either. It was just a small grocery store that was linked to a tiny family deli next door. Madame Maria rented the space out to a nice small family who had come to Konoha from Rain Country to start a new life. Madame Maria could be such a pain, but Ria knew that her boss had a heart of gold deep down. It was just buried under the many problems one faced when running a small business. After all, she would go out of her way to help her and her younger brother. She was roused from her thoughts by the bell chime from the front of the shop. "Welcome to Madame Maria's Grocery and Deli. How may I help you today?" she recited as she turned around and froze at the person in the doorway. The boy stood holding the glass door with freshly applied bandage wraps tied around his ankles and right shoulder. "I said I'd be here, didn't I?" He smirked as he shut the door behind him. She glanced up and down at him before she raised her eyebrow. "If you think that being injured is going to gain any sympathy from me, you are mistaken." "Wouldn't dream of it," he replied as he made his way through the store. "Good. Now then, what the hell did you do to yourself?" she asked as she circled him, inspecting his wrappings. "It looks worse than it really is." "I'm really fully healed, but the doctor wouldn't let me go without these just to make sure I didn't scratch at the scars." "Well, glad to see you didn't get yourself killed, duck butt," she smirked as a tick mark appeared on his forehead. He didn't want to call her out on it, but he knew it would just encourage her more. "I've told you, my name is Sasuke." "I know, but I just can't help it. I call M as I see M, and your hair fits the bill." He simply grunted as he glanced across the store. "So what is it you do here?" She lightly blushed in embarrassment as she glanced at the floor. "Basically anything they need me to do. I restock the products during the day, sweep the floors, and sometimes work cashier. Sometimes, like today, my boss has me working as a waitress in the deli next door." He raised his eyebrow and glanced at her. "Aren't you a little young to be working this much?" She glared back at him. "Aren't you a little young to be a shinobi?" He shrugged at her fair response. It was just a little odd for someone his age to have a job this young. It was a foreign idea to him to work as a civilian. The closest he had ever come was doing those inane D-rank missions, but those had been shut down rather fast. Plus, he always reassured himself that they were all for the success of the village. This was just his pride and moral code eating away at him. "So what will I be doing to help anyways?" Her eyes glimmered as she grabbed him by the hand and started leading him towards the deli. "Hanaya-san, you've got an extra helper today," she shouted towards the back. "Really now?" a voice replied as a young man poked his head out of the kitchen door. He was a rather skinny man with short hair, dressed in black work clothes and a white apron. He offered the boy an apologetic smile as he noticed Ria dragging him along. The girl could be quite forceful. He offered them a small bow as he spoke. "It is a pleasure to meet you. My name is Hanaya Yohei." "And yours?" "Sasuke Uchiha," he replied as he returned the bow. "Really now?" "Well, it's an honor to be graced with your aid, Uchiha-sama." Ria shot him a strange look. "Man, people just love to kiss your ass, don't they?" Hanaya lightly bopped her with his ladle. Not enough to hurt her, but enough to garner her attention. "Language, Ria. We really need to work on your manners," he sighed as he wiped the utensil off with a towel. "But manners are boring." She groaned as she hung her head back. Sasuke's brow twitched as he started to draw painful comparisons to a certain blonde he knew. "Well no, how will you be assisting me, Uchiha-sama?" he asked. "I figured you could let Gribbs have the day off and let Sasuke here work the dishes," Ria responded for him with a smirk. Sasuke sent her a glare. "Hey, all I did was spill over some fruit." He backed away as she got right back in his face. "Yeah, and almost all of it bruised because of you, which means nobody bought it. Madame Maria docked half of my pay for the day because of that. So you are going to help Hanaya through the lunch rush and then we can call it even." Sparks between their eyes as neither wanted to back down. Finally Sasuke just sighed, and snatched an apron off the wall. "Better to just get this over with. Let's just do this," he sighed as he headed into the kitchen. Ria sent him a smirk and a tiny salute before heading back towards the other store. Across the village, Hayashi Hyuga sat at his desk working through his daily paperwork. A short knock on his door caught his attention. "Yes?" "Excuse me, sir," one of his maids called out, "but you have a visitor." Hayashi frowned. "I do not recall having an appointment today." "No, sir. He said that he did not need an appointment. We obviously told him to schedule one, but he simply showed the gate guards one of the clan's lotus tokens." Hayashi straightened up at that. Those tokens were rarely handed out by a clan head, and usually only to their closest of friends and family outside of the clan. Right now, there was only one man alive whom he had given that token. "Send him in at once, and please bring us some tea." "Yes, sir." Hayashi began clearing his desk, just as the door slid open. A rare smile spread across his face as a familiar face walked up to his desk. Jiraiya-sensei, I was unaware you were in town. I'm pleased you dropped by. Come now. It's the least I could do to check in on my favorite student, he boomed with a smile. Hayashi raised his eyebrow and sent him a glare. Your favorite by default. I'm the only one left. Jiraiya let out an embarrassed chuckle and rubbed his head as he took a seat across from him. Now I wouldn't say that. We've gone over this before. Minato was the favorite. Mikoto and I knew that well enough. Now, don't be all stingy. You know how much I cared for each of you. Indeed I do, but that doesn't mean I won't stop poking at your guilt just a little. It is too entertaining. They both chuckled as they nostalgia washed over them. The maid brought in a plate of tea, and the two eagerly began catching up. It had always bugged Jiraiya how much Hayashi would change when he was in private versus when he was in public. No one ever really got to see his more upbeat side. The side of him that drew his wife to him. Have you seen her son yet? Mikoto's? Hayashi nodded. You should see him. He looks so much like her, especially his face and hair. Hopefully not too long, Jiraiya cut in. Just the bangs and color, Hayashi amended. However, he seems to have picked up more of his father's personality than hers. Jiraiya sighed as he sipped his tea. I'll never understand what she saw in him. None of us did, Hayashi responded as he set down his cup. And how is little Hinata-chan doing? I think she was about to me the last time I saw her. Hayashi was quiet before he responded. She is doing well. She takes so much after her mother. Her looks, her personality, her aptitude in creating new jutsu. It's like gazing into the past. She even managed to persuade her mother's summons to accept her. Jiraiya chuckled at Hayashi's uncomfortable look. It was always a sour point for the patriarch that the clan's summons never accepted him. However, Jiraiya had noticed his pause. Is something wrong? We've had a couple incidents over the past few years, and they have been increasing in frequency over the past few months. Define incident. Do you remember when I came to you for your advice regarding the stone ring hidden beneath the library? I recall. Did you ever make any progress? None at all. But somehow Hinata has. Jiraiya froze and slowly set his tea down on the desk. Really now? Indeed. When she was about 10, she stumbled down into the library and the ring activated to her presence. The whole room was leaking chakra, and she was bombarded with information. She has revealed more knowledge about the monument than any clan leader has in over 70 years. That doesn't sound too bad, Jiraiya mused as he leaned back crossing his fingers. However, there is a problem that I have begun to notice. She is lying to me, little Hinata. She was so sweet and innocent. I thought you said she was just like her mother. Hayashi nodded. She is. Until very recently, she was as shy as you could possibly imagine, and could hardly get a sentence out through her stuttering. Her exposure with her teammates has certainly helped her grow more comfortable in her own skin. She is more compassionate than I find acceptable in a shinobi, but she knows when to shelf her emotions for the sake of a mission. What is bothering me is where she is getting certain information. Jiraiya nodded, prompting him to go on. I recently had Shikaka Nara take a swing at translating some of the hieroglyphs on the wall. He and his cousin have made decent progress from the words Hinata claimed to have seen from the initial incident, but her recent stories are not adding up. She has been claiming to decipher new stories, but I do not believe where she says they are coming from are quite true. Why? When she approached me with the first story, I was very pleased that she had decided to open up to me. I had her show me where on the wall the story came from, but when I handed it off to Shikaku, he reported that the translations did not match up. Jiraiya frowned as he stroked his chin. Do you believe her stories are genuine? Absolutely. Her translations from the first event matched up too perfectly to Shikaku's findings for her to be faking the incident. What is making me doubt her claims of their origin is what she told me 2 days ago. She had just returned from her mission to Wave Country, and the next morning she ran into my office claiming to have found out the next portion of the story. But Jiraiya egged on. But Hinata never went downstairs to the library the night she returned. How are you sure? There are seals placed along the entrance to the final floor. They are mostly there to prevent people, who are not from the main branch from entering, but they also serve another purpose. The seals register anyone who enters through the barrier. I checked the seals, and there were no new events logged in for that night. Could they have been tampered with? I don't believe so. Those seals were crafted by some of the leading experts among the elders, Plus Hinata does not have any training in Fuinjutsu. Jiraiya paused for a moment before he snorted and smirked back at student, before throwing his head back and laughing. Hayashi seemed confused by the outburst. She might not have any Fuinjutsu knowledge, but I'm pretty sure she knows someone who does. That boy. He just can't seem to keep himself out of trouble. Hayashi's eyes widened as he realized what Jiraiya was proposing. But why? What would they gain from hiding their presence? If I knew she went down there, it would only help her story's credibility. Don't know. Doesn't make sense to me either, but that seems like the only logical conclusion we have for now. Jiraiya straightened his back as he stared at his former student. I say let her work it out. If she is making progress and her friends are willing to help her, then I say leave it up to them. Just keep an eye on their developments and try to keep up with what she gives you. Hayashi hung his head. But I already promised I would help her. She may be a kunoichi, but she is still just a child. I have made too many mistakes raising her, and I want to be able to help her now. Jiraiya was silent as he stared at his last student. Tell you what. Make me a copy of these stories and I'll take a look into them myself. I travel around enough, and I may know of someone who will recognize them. Hayashi smiled and bowed his head. Thank you, sensei. I appreciate it. What else are teachers for? Several hours later. Sasuke growled as he set the final dish back on the rack. It had been grueling work for the past few hours and he was tired of these ridiculous chores. He couldn't argue he had anything else to do, but working in a kitchen was not the first thing that came to his mind. Kakashi had forbidden him from training until the doctor removed the bandages. Great job, duck butt. I must say I'm impressed. How was getting your noble hands a little dirty doing some grunt work? He cast her the side eye as he hung up the apron back on the wall. I've made up for my inconvenience. I'll see you around. Wait. She cried as she grabbed him by the shoulder. Don't be such a sourpuss. I'll say it. Thank you for keeping to your word. You more than made up for it. She sent him the first honest smile he had seen from her, and she began pushing him towards the door. Now let's go. I'm starving and I could use something to eat. Sasuke could only lightly protest, as he was dragged down out the door and down the street. Come on. There is this little place on the corner 2 blocks from here that is just to die for. Hey, let me go. I'm not that hungry. Right at that moment, his stomach decided to let out a loud groan. She giggled and a tick mark appeared on Sasuke's forehead. Of course. Fine. Lead the way. They began walking side by side and continued down the street. As they were walking, 2 sets of eyes bulged at the sight of the pair. One was about to speak out, but the other clamped her hand to the other's mouth. They quietly took to the roofs as they silently started stalking the pair. Sasuke's earlier comparisons to his blonde teammate resurfaced and he groaned as he caught sight of their destination. What? Don't you like Ichiraka ramen? I think I'm going to be sick. This is the only place my teammate drags us to for lunch. Then he must have good taste, she remarked as she dragged him under the banners. Hey old man. Hit me up with your best pork ramen. Ah, Ria. I was wondering when you would show up. The old man chuckled as he came out from the back. And Sasuke too. He was surprised as he saw the 2 of them sit down. How do you 2 know each other? I owed her a favor, Sasuke quickly cut in before she could comment. The last thing he needed was the chef blabbing to Naruto about his day of manual labor. If he ever found out, he would never live it down. I'm never letting him live this down. Naruto smirked as he and Hinata stared at the 2 from an alley across the street. Naruto-kun, be nice, Hinata chided. Fulfill a promise, my ass. He just ditched us, so he could hang out with some girl. You don't know that. Maybe he has finally made a new friend. Bull. It took us all nearly dying before we became friends. Oh, can you imagine Sakura-chan and Ino-chan right now? Their reactions would be priceless. Hinata couldn't help but giggle at the idea, but was shocked and tugged at Naruto's shirt as he started to leave their hiding place. What are you doing? What do you think? I'm going to embarrass the hell out of him. Don't you dare. You know how hard it is for him to make friends. Just leave him be. But Hinata-chan. He whined. What do you 2 think you're doing? They froze in place at the sound of the voice. They trembled as they slowly turned around to face Kakashi squatting right behind them. Now, why are you 2 bothering your teammate? Sasuke frowned as he heard screaming coming down the street, but he was distracted when Ria asked, so why are you all bandaged up? I thought you rookie ninja didn't really go on dangerous missions. I'm curious to know myself, the IM said as she leaned on the counter. Naruto-kun dropped by and gave us his version of the events, but as you can guess, they were a bit embellished. It would be nice to hear your perspective on it. So Sasuke began describing their mission to Wave, filling in the blanks that his teammate had neglected to fill. Everyone in the restaurant flinched when he mentioned being impaled by Haku's water spikes, and remained silent as he finished his story. How did you all deal with that Gata guy? Ria asked. Not sure. Hinata healed me and was helping me up the bank of the river the entire time. I don't really know the details of what happened after I passed out. Ria was silent before she said, I think I have to amend my earlier statement. What do you mean? Sasuke asked as he swiveled his chair. When you were leaving the village, I think I blurted out how all you shinobi just fight for money. I may have been a little rude. I'm just a little bitter about shinobi in general, but even I know you all aren't like that. Some of you fight for more than that. She smiled as she glanced up at him. You are lucky to have such a special friend. The only thing he seems to care about is helping his friends. He must care an awful lot. Sasuke was silent as Naruto's rampage at the sight of his injured friends raced through his mind. Yeah, I guess he does. The restaurant fell silent. Bursting the awkward silence, Ria began to chuckle. You shinobi are all so strange. Taking missions to kill others, yet won't stop spouting off about love and friendship. That plus your ridiculous ninja magic. Sasuke snorted as he glanced at her. Ninja magic? She pouted as she put her hands on her hips. How else can you explain it? You guys can walk up walls, shoot fire, and make water dragons for God's sake. You are all so weird to me. Sasuke actually chuckled at the girl's rant. It had been a long time since he honestly chuckled like that. The duo began to argue over the science of chakra, as a lone figure watched them from across the street. Kakashi chuckled at how the girl was able to get a rise out of his student, before he turned to leave. It wouldn't be fair for him to spy just after he had chastised his other students for doing the same thing. 2 days later. Well, I want to congratulate you all again for completing what should have been an A-rank mission. I'm glad to see the time I allotted for you wasn't a waste. They smirked under the praise as they lined up in front of the Hokage. That being said, you still have a quota to fill if you want to qualify for the Chunin exams, so I hope you're ready for your next assignment. Team 7 is going to be assigned to deal with a small bandit camp that has set up near the boundaries of one of our ports. Naruto was bursting with glee and bouncing around. Now this is what he was talking about. Unfortunately, you will not be joining your teammates on this assignment, Naruto. Naruto was instantly deflated and crashed into the ground. What? Why? The Hokage ignored his outburst as he continued. You have a lot of ground to cover if you want to fill up your mission quota. So I have decided to split up some of the work so you knock multiple missions out at the same time. Naruto seemed slightly reassured by that. In fact, it almost sounded more appealing. So I get to take on a C rank by myself? Not entirely. You'll simply be accompanying someone a short distance from the village, and serving as his assistant with some of his work. You should be excited, Naruto, for you'll be helping the village's seal master while he's in the village. Naruto's eyes grew to the size of saucers, and stars started twinkling in his eyes. This was 100 times better than dealing with some stupid bandits. He was in heaven. As he went off in his own dreamland, the Hokage turned to Kakashi. In the meantime, Guy has happily offered one of his students to take Naruto's place on your mission. Kakashi nodded as Naruto was shaken from his stupor and raced on top of Hokage's desk. So who is he? Where is he? What's he like? When do I get to meet him? His barrage of questions was halted as someone knocked on the door. It was an older man that none of the genin recognized. He was tall with spiky white hair that stretched down his back. The man glanced at Sasuke and Hinata and mentally smirked. Hayashi had been right. They really were clones of their parents. They weren't the only ones. He sadly smiled as his eyes finally fell on Naruto. It hurt him just as much as he thought it would. He reminded him so much of Minato when he had been that age, especially with those clothes. The Hokage coughed as he caught Naruto's attention. Naruto, this is Jiraiya. You'll be accompanying him for the next few days. Jiraiya smirked as he walked over, ruffled his hair. So, Sensei tells me you've got quite the knack for seals. That's it for part 6. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.